Hey everyone. Tonight, we're slipping into the perfumed yet putrid world of Queen Elizabeth I, a monarch so revered yet so famously foul-smelling you'd be wise not to breathe through your nose. This wasn't the glowing Gloriana of portraits. No, behind the painted face and towering wigs was a woman whose teeth had rotted to blackened stumps, whose breath could wilt flowers, and whose gowns, heavy with sweat, stale perfume, and the rot of old lye-soaked linen, turned every room into a trap of suffocating stench. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights. Light a candle if you've got one, or just let the soft glow of your screen settle in beside you. Close your eyes and let the rustling of stiff Tudor gowns replace the noise of the modern day. You're walking into a chamber lit by flickering tapers, where a queen demands your presence and your absolute discretion. Just remember, flattery might earn her favor, but nothing will save you from the smell. The heavy doors of the Tudor court swing open, revealing a woman who is far more than a monarch. Queen Elizabeth I is not just the ruler of England. She is a living symbol, a carefully crafted masterpiece of power, wit, and unyielding will. To know Elizabeth is to glimpse a force of nature, a queen whose very presence commands both awe and fear. Imagine stepping into the great hall. The murmur of courtiers hushed as she appeared. Her pale, almost ethereal face seems carved from marble, a deliberate contrast to the fiery ambition burning behind her steady gaze. This is no ordinary queen. Her skin is meticulously powdered, hiding the scars of a childhood illness that left its mark but never weakened her spirit. Her lips, often set in a firm, knowing smile, speak of a mind always calculating, always watching. Her hair is a blazing crown of red gold, arranged in towering waves and intricate braids, crowned with pearls and jewels that catch the light like captured flames. The queen's hair alone is a statement, a symbol of her fiery resolve, her divine right to rule, and a vivid reminder of the Tudor legacy she carries on her shoulders. Elizabeth's attire is no less commanding. Heavy velvet and silk gowns, embroidered with gold thread and adorned with jewels, wrap her in regal authority. Every stitch, every fold, every sparkling gem is carefully chosen to project an image of strength and purity. The farthingale beneath her skirts flares out like armor, giving her a presence that fills the room and leaves no doubt. This woman is England's sovereign. But beyond this dazzling exterior is a queen with far less glamorous realities. Beneath the layers of makeup and finery lies a monarch whose hygiene habits deteriorate as fiercely as her health declines. The lavish scent of her perfumes cannot mask the odors that come with infrequent bathing, a norm in the Tudor era, but one that even her servants find hard to endure as the years go on. Serving Elizabeth means confronting the reality of a body growing old and neglected. The queen's skin, once glowing with youthful vigor, now carries the faint traces of sweat and grime beneath layers of heavy powder. Her hair, while still crowned with jewels, sometimes smells faintly musty, a sign that frequent washing has long been abandoned. The delicate hands that sign decrees and letters are often rough and stained, their cleanliness sacrificed to the demands of ruling a kingdom. The queen's chamber, a space of opulence and power, also becomes a place where the smell of aging flesh and stale perfumes mingles in the heavy air. As her health declines, so too does her tolerance for the servants tasked with cleaning and freshening her, a task that grows more daunting with every passing year. You soon realize that serving Elizabeth is as much about endurance as it is about loyalty. To stand close to the throne is to be enveloped by the physical realities of a monarch who, despite all her strength and symbolism, cannot escape the human frailty of age and hygiene. And this truth, stark and unvarnished, is why you wouldn't last a day in her service. There was no steam, no splashing, no scent of lavender soap, or the gurgle of warm water poured into a copper tub. In the private chambers of Queen Elizabeth I, the ritual of bathing was not a daily event, not even a weekly one. The Virgin Queen, dressed in brocades and jewels that shimmered with the power of empire, rarely immersed her royal body in water. And if you served her, you'd learn very quickly. Cleanliness was not what you thought it meant. There was, of course, a reason, or at least a belief behind it. In Elizabeth's time, water was considered risky. Physicians and wise men of the 16th century feared that hot baths opened the pores and invited illness into the body. Warm water was thought to soften the flesh, unsealing it to the dangers of the air. The queen had been taught that cleanliness came not from scrubbing, but from preservation, blocking the body from the world, not exposing it to it. She reportedly claimed to bathe once a month, whether she needed it or not. For those around her, ladies in waiting, chambermaids, dressers, that meant managing the scent, the sweat, and the reality of life in heavy clothing worn against bare, unwashed skin for weeks at a time. Your day might begin with dressing the queen. First, you'd carry her linen shift, finely spun, but yellowed with wear and clinging to perfume more than freshness. You'd slide it down her arms with careful hands, your face close to hers, breathing in the sharp notes of rose water and the deeper musk of skin left long untouched by soap. Then came the layers. Stiffened petticoats, corsets laced tightly over her ribs, gowns sewn with pearls and padding that trapped heat against her body. The queen would sweat through them under courtly lights, during dances in council chambers. But to remove them each day for washing? Impossible. Laundry was rare and precious. Clothes were brushed, not soaked, sprinkled with scented herbs. A lady's maid might stitch in a fresh sachet of crushed violets or lavender under each sleeve. But the stains and smells remained. Now imagine helping with her makeup, her legendary white face. The mixture, known as Venetian ceruse, was a blend of vinegar and white lead. It was thick, chalky, and toxic. Each morning, you'd help layer it over the previous day's application, sometimes without full removal. Her skin, already damaged by smallpox, would flake and crack beneath it. The makeup trapped dirt and oil. But cleanliness was not about removing grime. It was about appearances. To mask the odors that inevitably followed, Elizabeth turned to perfumes, not dabbed, but doused. Rose oil, ambergris, civet, extracted from the scent glands of a wild cat, musk from deer, sweet-smelling but cloying and powerful. If you served her closely, your nose would never catch a breath of fresh air. Only the haze of heady oils and human sweat swaddled in silk. The queen's hair, once golden, later hidden beneath elaborate red wigs, was rarely washed. Instead, wigs were powdered with crushed starch and scented with orris root. Lice were a quiet reality at court, even in the queen's chamber. You might spend hours delousing wigs in silence, watching the powder fall like snow over the floor. If the queen was in a good mood, you might hum softly while combing through her hair. If not, you'd work quickly, your fingers trembling. And what of her teeth? Blackened by sugar and untreated decay, they caused frequent discomfort. She was known to hold a handkerchief to her mouth when laughing. You might be asked to prepare wine mixed with herbs to dull her pain. Cloves, myrrh, or vinegar. You'd pour it with care, knowing that even the act of sipping caused her agony. Yet dental hygiene as we know it did not exist. Toothpicks were carved from bone. Teeth were rarely cleaned. The royal breath, for all its majesty, could be a force to reckon with. Sometimes she'd permit a dry wash, a rub-down with cloths soaked in alcohol or perfumed spirits. You'd stand by with warmed linen and carefully wipe her neck, her arms, her underarms, each motion controlled, each cloth used sparingly. But even this was rare. The queen did not believe her body required frequent cleansing. Her spirit, perhaps, but not her skin. What's more, Elizabeth's court followed her example. Cleanliness was a matter of clothing, cosmetics, and bearing. Not soap, not water. Servants would go months without a bath. Gloves were perfumed, not washed. Bed linens were turned, not laundered. When illness swept through the palace, as it often did, many blamed the air, the stars, or bad humors. Few blamed the rot gathering quietly in their unwashed layers. And yet, for all of this, she was considered the paragon of refinement. Her portraits show grace, perfection, power. But if you'd stepped behind the painted curtain, into her dressing chamber, her bedchamber, her privy, you'd have known the truth. Serving Elizabeth was not for the faint of heart or sensitive of nose. The queen may have ruled an empire, but her body, like any other, sweated, ached, and decayed. And if you were the one attending to her, you'd learn quickly how much work went into preserving the illusion of divine cleanliness in a world that reeked of humanity. No, you wouldn't have lasted a day. The privy chamber. To most, it sounded like a place of gentle privacy, something soft and scented, where a queen might recline on a velvet cushion and sip watered wine beneath a sun-dappled window. But for those who served inside it, for those who stepped into the linen-hung sanctum of Elizabeth Tudor's inner court, it was something else entirely. It was warm, over-warm, the kind of warmth that grew not from the sun or a hearth, but from tightly closed windows and too many bodies crammed too close to royalty. The queen, notoriously averse to drafts, had her windows stuffed with oiled cloth or sealed tight with horn panes. In winter, this sealed in the frost. In summer, it sealed in everything else. The moment you stepped inside, your nose would flinch. Not from the rot of filth, not quite, but from the layered perfume of things desperately trying to hide it. Rose water, ambergris, powdered iris root, lavender crushed in mortars and dabbed behind ears and into armpits. But beneath those, always, was the same human truth. Bodies, dozens of them, sweating quietly in silk, linen, velvet, and wool. The smell of fabric worn too many times, of wigs not yet washed, of skin powdered white but never cleaned underneath. And then there was the Queen herself. Elizabeth bathed rarely, perhaps once a month, perhaps even less when ill. She believed, like many of her time, that water could seep into the body and let disease in. Her hygiene instead relied on linen shifts, dozens of them, changed frequently to absorb sweat. That duty fell to her closest maids, who had to help her disrobe and relayer in private, often in rooms that hadn't seen fresh air in days. Imagine standing in that room, the scent of aged cosmetics thick on the air, the metallic tang of vinegar washes, and the ghost of sour breath masked with cloves and candied orange peel. Yet this chamber was more than just the Queen's dressing room. It was her court, within the court. Her confidants lived here. Her ladies, her spies, her whisperers. As a servant, you might be called to deliver a message. Prepare a bedchamber. Warm a pewter dish of ointment by the fire. You'd knock softly, be admitted by one of her ladies, and find yourself not in a serene oasis, but a corridor of hushed urgency and smothered ambition. The chamber itself was cramped, not the grand halls of state, but narrow passageways lined with tapestries, stools, low beds, and heavy trunks. Thick rushes lined the floors, hiding scraps of dropped food, clumps of shed hair, or things less savory. These rushes were changed rarely, maybe once a season, sometimes less. They held on to every scent and stain. Furniture had to be rearranged constantly. The Queen rarely sat still. One moment she demanded a stool near the window. The next she wished to pace. You'd have to move quickly, quietly, keeping the clack of your shoes to a whisper and the scrape of wood against floorboards to a bare minimum. She hated noise unless she made it. Now consider her morning routine. The Queen awoke at dawn, or sooner. A maid of the bedchamber would rouse her, prepare her linen coif, and present warmed gloves perfumed with ambergris or civet. The stench of the latter, musky, animal-like, often mingled with the morning breath of courtiers lingering nearby, who had yet to brush or rinse anything. There were no toothbrushes as we know them, no toothpaste. A clove or piece of fennel might be chewed, but the scent of digestion and damp velvet always returned. Serving in the privy chamber meant constantly being within feet of her body. You helped her layer her gowns, the inner kirtle, the padded roll, the stiffened bodice, the overskirt. Each piece had to be secured with hooks and eyes, ties, and pins. Elizabeth stood still while her women worked, arms stiff, expression unreadable. But any misstep, a prick, a stumble, the scent of unclean hands, could end your favor. She was fastidious in her own way. She would sniff the air, wrinkle her nose, make a cutting comment, or worse, say nothing at all, and have you dismissed before the next sunrise. Then there was the makeup, lead-based ceruse mixed with vinegar, layer upon layer painted on cracked skin, hiding scars from smallpox, enhancing the illusion of eternal youth. The paste dried slowly. It stung. The smell, metallic, sour, hung about her like a veil. And still, you had to lean close to apply more. Her maids used linen cloths to smooth the layers. They used pins to adjust her hairline, and sometimes glued false pieces in place. All with hands that couldn't shake, and breath they dared not release too strongly. During colder months, the chamber was heated with coal braziers or wood fires, but the smoke clung to clothes, hair, and lungs. Coughs were common. Eyes watered. The air grew thicker. Windows stayed shut. The only ventilation came from doors opened by passing attendants, and even those were few. The queen hated interruptions. Meals were taken here too, sometimes light, sometimes elaborate. Trays of preserved fruits, meat pies and jellies jostled for space on low tables. The scent of cooked goose fat or warm ale didn't mingle well with ambergris and sweat. Leftovers were scraped into rushes or dropped between cushions until removed by low-ranking servants, or not at all. The privy chamber was also the site of gossip, of strategy. Men whispered through curtain gaps, ladies giggled behind fans, and the queen listened more than she let on. If you were present during these moments, tending a candle, offering a glass of watered wine, you had to pretend to hear nothing, smell nothing, see nothing, but everything stayed with you. The candle wax, the warmed linens, the hidden chamber pots, the dried sweat of 5-day-old underthings, the perfume that made your eyes sting, the silence that followed a royal frown. Serving in Elizabeth's privy chamber wasn't about grandeur. It wasn't even about survival. It was about holding your breath, sometimes literally, and knowing your place in the thick, musky air of power. You didn't last here by strength. You lasted by subtlety, silence, and an iron stomach. And no matter how many roses you stuffed into your apron, nothing quite masked the scent of a queen who never bathed. The first time you helped her dress, you nearly fainted. Not from nerves, though those were certainly gnawing at your gut, but from the heat, the weight of it all. 7 layers of fabric, maybe 8 on colder days, linen shifts, a tightly laced corset stiff with whalebone, then a kirtle, then sleeves separately tied, then the farthingale, a drum-like hoop to hold the heavy skirts aloft, petticoats, gowns with embroidery so thick it crackled like dry leaves when touched, and finally, a stomacher pinned down the front to seal her in, like a suit of armor, not to protect, but to impress, constrain, and command. Dressing the queen was a slow, brutal process. Each layer had to be adjusted, pinned, tucked, tied, and with every added garment, the heat gathered, a dense, humid heat, clinging to flesh and fabric alike. You were sweating before you'd finished buttoning her inner sleeves, and she never said a word about it. She didn't need to. Her look alone, the quiet narrowing of her pale, kohl-rimmed eyes, told you if you'd erred, if the ruff was crooked, if the lace was twisted, if the pearl trimming wasn't sitting right against her powdered neck. The smell came next. That was harder to ignore. You learned quickly. Queen Elizabeth's gowns were seldom washed, too delicate, too intricate, too costly to risk with water. Soap, what there was of it, was harsh and lye-heavy, meant for linens and chamber pots, not embroidered silks threaded with gold. Instead, her wardrobe was hung out to air in open courtyards, or perfumed with crushed lavender and dried orange peels sewn into tiny cloth sachets. But it didn't help much. The smell was never foul exactly, not at first, but it was old, musty, the scent of sweat that had long since dried and been reabsorbed into stiff brocade. The cloying perfume she wore, rose, ambergris, civet, didn't mask it so much as mingle with it. The result was something heavy and unrelenting. And because you worked closest to her skin, helping lace corsets and fasten sleeves, you noticed it more than anyone. On hot days, the fabric near her underarms would be damp, even before she left her chambers. Sometimes you'd see a trace of yellow on the fine linen shift, a smear of rouge transferred from her jawline, or the faint brown rings of old sweat that had seeped into her chemise. You'd whisper apologies when trying to tug it free, afraid the fragile cloth might tear in your hands. Some days, it did. Then there was the ruff, the starched, pleated collar that framed her face like a halo of lace. It was a nightmare to maintain. Bleached with urine, stiffened with starch, reshaped with heated irons known as goffering tongs. You learned to press each fold just so, not too tight, not too slack, or the whole thing would sag and wrinkle. She had dozens of ruffs, none of them pleasant to work with. And every time she turned her head, you'd hear the papery rustle of stiffened linen against the side of her face. You came to hate that sound. The corsets were worse. Not for their appearance. They were beautifully embroidered, some with silver threads and pearl-tipped ties, but for what they did to her body. They compressed her ribcage until her breathing grew shallow. They pinched her waist until her posture stiffened into something unnatural. You saw the red marks they left behind, the bruises on her sides, the places where bone rubbed against bone. And still, she insisted on being bound tighter. No compromise, no easing. She needed to look unchanging, eternal, the Virgin Queen, the Gloriana. And if that required sacrifice, then sacrifice it would be. There were rumors among the other attendants that her stockings hadn't been changed in weeks. The silk near her feet was stiff with old sweat, too fragile to wash, too valuable to discard. That her shoes, often velvet, sometimes leather, were stuffed with dried herbs to fight foot odor. And still, the smell crept through. Some of the maids claimed she had fungus between her toes. You never dared look that closely. You were just glad you weren't assigned to the lower half. What no one ever said aloud, not in the Queen's presence, not even in whispers, was that all this discomfort was by design. The grandeur, the layers, the stiffness, the smell. It was a fortress, a barrier. No man would ever get too close. No subject would ever forget their place. Even her body, padded, perfumed, painted, was a piece of performance. And you, kneeling at her feet, adjusting her skirts while trying not to inhale too deeply, were part of that performance, too. You once spent 3 full hours preparing a single gown. The embroidery had snagged. The silver threads had dulled. You had to pick them clean with a bone hook, thread by thread, until they shone again. When she wore it, no one knew the labor it took. They saw splendor. They didn't see the stench. They didn't feel the sweat. That was your burden. After a few months, you stopped noticing the weight. You built calluses from hauling velvet and satin across cold stone floors. You learned how to hold your breath just long enough to fasten a corset without coughing. You stopped flinching at the sound of her voice. But the smell, the old fabric, the tired perfume, the faint sourness beneath the lace, that stayed with you. It soaked into your own skin, clung to your fingernails, lingered in your hair. You'd wake at night with it in your nostrils, as if the Queen herself had laid her head beside yours. And you'd remember, this was glory. This was power. This was what it meant to serve her. Not with honor, not with praise, but with silent, nose-pinched endurance. Becoming a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth I wasn't simply a matter of pulling on a fine gown and fluttering about court. No, it was an intricate dance of politics, pressure, and physical endurance. You didn't just serve the Queen, you survived her. First, the selection process. You weren't chosen for your charm alone. You needed pedigree, noble blood running in your veins, preferably traced back several generations. Your family had to be in good standing, preferably connected to influential figures already whispering in corridors of court. Being attractive helped, but it wasn't enough. You had to be clever, but not cleverer than Her Majesty. Obedient, but not robotic. Loyal, but without ambition that smelled of treason. You had to be visible, but not distracting. Beautiful, but not rivaling. Elizabeth wanted stars in her orbit, not comets threatening to blaze brighter than herself. And once you were chosen, after all the politics and prayers, after your parents paid off the right people or made the right alliances, the work began. A lady-in-waiting woke before the Queen. Always. If Elizabeth stirred and found herself alone, without someone ready to draw back her bed curtains and kneel with a whisper of, "Good morrow, Majesty," your head might roll. Metaphorically at first, but if you embarrassed her enough in public, well, who's to say? You dressed her, not simply in silk and velvet, but in layers upon layers of fabric, shifts, stays, kirtles, petticoats, gowns, ruffs, farthingales, jeweled bodices, a daily armor stitched together by a dozen silent hands. You, buttoned, pinned, laced. You knew the exact weight of the ruby-encrusted girdle she wore on state occasions. You knew the scent of the musk she preferred to dab at her wrists to mask the lack of bathing. You knew her moods by the way she moved her hands. The Queen rarely bathed, not for lack of access, but for fear. The medical wisdom of the day warned that bathing opened the pores and made one vulnerable to disease. And so, you learned to perfume her linens, to powder her gowns, to freshen her bodice with lavender sachets, all without ever suggesting that the Virgin Queen might, well, need washing. To even imply such a thing was career suicide. Your hands never rested. You embroidered. You prepared her table. You kept her handkerchiefs clean and scented. You braided and unbraided wigs, adjusted jewels, fetched gloves, folded veils, and stood like a statue while the Queen read poetry aloud for hours. Sometimes you were expected to laugh. Sometimes not laughing was safer. Now, the danger was not just in the doing, it was in the not doing. You lived on alert. A wrinkle in her sleeve noticed too late could earn you a public tongue lashing. Bringing her the wrong fan? An hour of cruel silence. And if you let your eyes wander too long toward a visiting ambassador or some tall, dashing gentleman at court, you'd find yourself reassigned to the countryside, away from all the glitter, and with your family's name slightly more tarnished than before. And yet, for all the risks, it was considered a great honor. Meals were another performance. You helped arrange her fork, her goblet, her napkin, and no one ate until she did. You watched her lips closely, anticipating needs before she voiced them. And the food? Sometimes cold by the time it reached her. That wasn't your concern. Your job was to make it elegant. Presentation mattered more than taste. And let us not forget the court entertainments. You were expected to dance, to sing, to read aloud, to recite poetry, to accompany the Queen on progressions and long, dusty journeys through the English countryside. You rode beside her carriage, sometimes walking miles in impractical shoes, while holding up your skirt and trying not to sweat too obviously in the summer heat. You witnessed things, whispers in the shadows, rivalries between factions, tears behind tapestries. You knew which nobleman had angered the Queen that week, and which lady wore her ruff too high, or laughed too freely with the Earl of Essex. You had to say nothing, see everything, pretend always, and again, the makeup. God help you when it came to the makeup. Elizabeth's infamous white mask, a thick paste of ceruse, a deadly mixture of vinegar and lead. Each day, you helped her apply it, smoothing it over her cheeks and jaw, hiding age, hiding illness, hiding humanity itself. The Queen had scars from smallpox. She'd lost much of her hair, and still she insisted on radiance. You powdered her nose, placed artificial beauty spots, and hoped she wouldn't blame you for a streak or smear under the torches. But there were moments of tenderness, too. You might sit beside her as she wrote a letter. You might share a joke. Sometimes she held your hand when the headaches came, or the loneliness set in after the court retired, and she sat up remembering the lovers she never married. In those moments, you were not just a servant. You were a witness to the heart of the most powerful woman in Europe. And yet, that power was unstable. Elizabeth's favor was fickle. She could adore you one week and ice you out the next. Her jealousy was legendary. If a foreign dignitary praised your beauty too openly, your days at court might be numbered. If she suspected your ambitions grew too bold, you might find your place quietly replaced by a younger, more obedient girl. Some ladies grew old in her service. Others left suddenly, without explanation, their names never spoken again. And if you married, God help you. You better ask her permission first. Marrying without the Queen's blessing was treason to her pride. She had imprisoned ladies-in-waiting before for that very offense. To serve Elizabeth was to live in constant scrutiny, to stand straight, smile faintly, and carry the weight of an impossible standard. You were her mirror, but never her equal, and you had to polish that mirror daily, even as your own reflection faded behind duty, behind expectation, behind the powdered mask of royalty. You weren't just a lady-in-waiting. You were a ghost with a corset, a shadow in a gown, and you would either learn to love the silence of service or be devoured by it, because to fail the Queen, even once, meant losing everything. So you kneel before the crimson-draped seat, the Queen's close stool. At first glance, it resembles a small cushioned wooden throne, ornate and dignified, but beneath its velvet exterior lies a chamber pot lined with cloth, a shallow basin of polished pewter or ceramic. This is no ordinary chair. This is where the Queen relieves herself. And you, groom of the stool, appointed not by choice but by lineage or favor, are the one responsible for seeing the job done cleanly, silently, and without offense. It is early, and the chambermaids have already drawn the curtains in the privy chamber. Light spills in through the high glass, bouncing off gilded paneling and tapestries embroidered with Tudor roses. The room smells faintly of rosewater and warmed wool, with an undercurrent of something less fragrant. The truth that even monarchs must relieve themselves. The queen enters, flanked by her ladies. You bow deeply. She acknowledges you with a flicker of the eyes. No words are exchanged. Your task is as intimate as it is unspoken. The stool has already been checked, its linen fresh, its interior pot emptied and wiped with herbs. You lift the hem of her heavy gown as she positions herself. Elizabeth does not undress fully. Doing so would be beneath her dignity and too laborious. Instead, you and her closest ladies assist in loosening her stays, lifting her layers just enough to permit her to sit. There is no room for bashfulness. The queen expects you to perform your task as if it were a form of worship, and in many ways, it is. Access to the monarch's most private moments means access to secrets, to influence, to whispers, behind closed doors. But in exchange, you witness every flush of discomfort, every grunt, and on colder mornings, every shiver. When she is finished, you step forward, warm cloth in hand. Laced with lavender and rosemary, it is folded precisely and pre-warmed near the hearth. You wipe gently, silently. There is no room for clumsiness. Any misstep, a cold cloth, a brush of skin too firm, could earn you a glare or worse. Behind the stool, the pot is lifted out by another servant and carried away to be emptied in the palace's cesspit, some distance off. The contents will be buried or, in some cases, dried and burned. In Whitehall, Richmond, or Greenwich, the method is the same. Faces are not discussed. They are simply dealt with. Once the pot is removed, the cloth liner is stripped and replaced. No scent must remain. Herbs are rubbed along the edges. Marjoram, sweet flag, bay leaf, anything to mask the odor. The queen, meanwhile, has already begun her next command, her voice calm and cold as stone. The ritual has passed. You are now invisible again. But this is not your only task. You oversee her linen shifts, the fine undergarments that cling to her skin. They are rarely washed. Instead, they are aired, pressed, and sprinkled with perfume. Washing too frequently was thought to invite illness. And so, cloth is cycled, not scrubbed. You inspect it for stains. Blood from her endless courses, damp from sweat, or worse. Signs of aging the queen does not like to acknowledge. You are also keeper of her tablets, a term for the perfumed gloves and handkerchiefs she presses to her face when odors become intolerable. These, too, must be stored in cedar boxes and replenished daily. Her gloves are lined with ambergris or civet, musk distilled from glands. Each pair is a small sanctuary from the pungent closeness of court. And you manage the bath, not daily nor weekly, but when the queen commands it. The process is elaborate. Wooden tubs are brought to her chamber. Linen sheets are draped over them, so her skin will not touch common wood. The water, boiled and infused with herbs, is carried up in heavy copper pitchers. You test its warmth. You pour it yourself. You prepare the towel, thick, warm, and stitched with the Tudor crest. Sometimes she bathes only her feet, seated on a cushioned bench as you kneel to dry them. The scent of chamomile clings to her ankles. You dare not look her in the eye. Other times, she instructs a partial wash, her arms, neck, and back wiped with cloths soaked in vinegar water. She does not disrobe fully. The queen must remain composed, even when half naked. You watch her face for signs of discomfort. If the water is too hot, she will not say it. You must know before she does. Every day begins and ends this way. You, navigating the queen's body like a servant attending to a temple. There are no holidays, no sick days. Your role is not just hygiene. It is ritual, routine, reverence, and peril. There is the ever-present fear of displeasing her. One misstep, a clatter of the chamber pot, a drop of water spilled on her silk slipper, and you could be dismissed, publicly humiliated, or worse, quietly forgotten in the tower's gray chambers. You have seen it happen. You hear the courtiers whisper. They joke about the groom of the stool, but never in your presence. They pretend they would not kneel where you kneel, touch what you touch. But you know better. Access to the queen's most private moments is a kind of power, one they envy. When the day draws to a close and her gown is unlaced, you are once again summoned. You help remove her layers, the stiff bodice, the petticoats, the corset that binds her ribs. You assist her into her night shift, the linen warmed by the hearth. You bring her last perfumed cloth of the day and place it near her pillow. You prepare the stool once more, should she need it during the night. Then you bow, back away 3 steps, and leave her chamber in silence. This is your life. You serve not a woman, but a symbol, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, mistress of a crumbling empire of candlelight and chamber pots. And every moment you spend tending to her is a reminder that even the most powerful monarchs are still, in the end, just human. And that someone, always, must clean up after them. You rise long before the sun dares crack through the gray English sky. It's the kitchens first, a warren of low ceilings, heavy stone walls, and the constant clatter of knives, ladles, and boots. The scullery boys are already hauling water in sloshing pails, their backs wet from spilled buckets and sweat. Smoke curls from the hearths, and the scent is a thick, uneasy mixture of roasting meat, dried herbs, and soot-soaked linens. You tighten your apron, wash your hands in a basin of tepid rose water, and wait for the orders to begin. You are about to cook for Elizabeth, the Queen of England, and one mistake could cost a crown or your head. Nothing about feeding the monarch is simple. Her Majesty's menu is a tapestry of calculated choices, show, diplomacy, suspicion, and tradition all woven in. You do not choose the dishes. That's the job of the clerk of the kitchen, who consults not just with physicians, but with astrologers and courtiers. Today, roast swan, peacock pie, boiled eels in vinegar, quince jelly, and spiced hippocras wine. Not one item you can simply pull from a shelf. No refrigerators, no sealed tins, just a constant race against time, rot and rumor. Meat arrives in heavy carts from the palace butchery. It's been freshly slaughtered that morning, because if it wasn't, you'd know. Your nose would tell you. The swan's dull feathers cling to the damp skin, and its long neck must be curled into an artful display. Not butchered, not crude. You must make it beautiful. The peacock, too, must be re-feathered after roasting, tail spread as if still alive. There is no such thing as minimalism in Elizabeth's court. Food is theater, and the audience is always watching. You work fast, under a strict eye. Every cook's hand is watched by another. Every ingredient is counted, logged, tasted. Why? Because the real enemy is not undercooking. It's poisoning. Poison is the whisper you hear in every corridor of the palace. There are no dramatic vial drops or sudden collapses, Not usually. Poisoning is quiet, creeping. A powdered root in a syrup, a tainted fig, a tincture hidden in wine. There are those who'd pay a fortune to see Elizabeth fall. Foreign agents, jilted nobles, even factions within her own court, which is why each plate is prepared under tight lock and ritual. When the food is ready, it doesn't go straight to the queen. Number first, it passes to the gentleman tasters, elite servants who are well fed and well aware of their own expendability. They sample each dish in full view. A bite here, a sip there. Then they wait. 15 minutes, 30. If no signs of convulsions, vomiting, or sudden sweats appear, only then does the food go on. You glance at them as they eat. Do they flinch? Does one blink more than he should? You say nothing, but you note it. And still, there are other precautions. Each day, Elizabeth drinks from a different cup. Her silverware is polished to a shine, then inspected with a cloth. Even the linens that touch her lips, napkins of fine linen, are scented with specific perfumes, so she knows if the smell is off. A deviation could mean poison, or just clumsiness. But either way, it's your fault. Wine is trickier. Her favorite is sweet Rhenish or Canary wine, served lukewarm in the winter and cool in the summer. But wine can be laced with arsenic or belladonna with little alteration in taste. So before a flask is uncorked, it's sealed with wax and stamped by the cellarer. Then it's carried to the queen by a cupbearer, a man chosen for his loyalty and his silence. He pours it, and again tastes it first. If he hesitates, even a heartbeat, the queen will notice. And if Elizabeth suspects, she doesn't scream, she doesn't accuse. She simply puts down the cup and leaves. A quiet dismissal. And the whole kitchen knows what that means. Someone will not be returning tomorrow. Food preservation is another war you must fight daily. There's no ice house within the palace grounds. Not yet. So you salt, you pickle, you dry, you soak meats in vinegar, you press fruits in sugar. Milk is curdled into cheese within hours. Fish must be gutted and smoked the same day. A kitchen boy once left a basket of eels out too long. The stench curled up through the flagstones and into the queen's chambers. He didn't come back the next day. You think of this as you slice into the saffron pears. They're preserved in syrup so thick it clings like molasses. A sweet offering, a moment of indulgence. You plate them on pewter with candied rose petals. But even now, a little voice in the back of your head asks, did someone swap the syrup? Did they slip in something that won't show until morning? The food is ready. The platters are polished, steaming, fragrant. You pass them to the liverymen, who bow and begin the careful walk to the great hall. You will not see the queen eat, but if the next meal is ordered, if the dishes return scraped clean, it means the food was accepted. Your hands are safe. For now. You slump back, exhausted, against the hearth wall. Sweat soaks your tunic. Grease coats your arms. The fire roars behind you, but you feel cold. Feeding the queen is not an honor. It's a gamble. One played every morning with knives, smoke, and the slow, bubbling rumor of death. And tomorrow, it begins again. You are one of the queen's sweetmakers, a servant trained not in warfare or politics, but in the delicate, meticulous art of scent. Your duty is as clear as it is exhausting, to battle the queen's own flesh. Queen Elizabeth I, regal and radiant, rarely bathed, she like most of her age, believed that water could open the pores and invite illness. Instead, she powdered, she perfumed, and you helped mask the scent of a sovereign who ruled an empire but feared a cold bath more than a French navy. You begin with the roses. Not just any rose will do. The best come from the Queen's private gardens, plucked before sunrise when their oils are most potent. You carry them, carefully cradled in cloth, to the still room. There, along with lavender, marjoram, cloves, and dried orange peel, you distill the petals with vinegar and alcohol, letting them steep in a glass flask kept warm by the hearth's embers. But perfumes are not just for the wrists or neck. No, Elizabeth requires scent in her hair, behind her ears, beneath her bodice. She will be layered with it, masked in it, steeped in it like a garment steeped in wine. You mix powdered orris root, made from the rhizome of a specific iris flower, into fine cloth pouches that will be tucked into the folds of her gowns. Every hem must whisper of violets. Powdering is no less delicate. The Queen's famed white face is a canvas of lead-based ceruse, made from finely ground white lead and vinegar. It gives her that iconic ghostly glow, but it flakes, it cakes, and it poisons. Each morning, you must dust fresh layers on her cheeks and brow, brushing it gently with swan feather applicators. Her skin underneath is raw, sometimes blistered. You've seen it. Everyone has, but no one speaks. Over the ceruse goes the rouge, carmine, from crushed cochineal beetles imported at great cost. Then comes the scent. With careful fingers, you pat musk and civet at the temples, both pungent and powerful. Today, musk comes from a gland beneath a stag's belly, civet from a wild cat's anal glands. They are diluted, of course, with alcohol or floral oils, but the smell never quite fades. You've grown used to it. Sour and sweet, cloying and royal. You sprinkle scented powders into the Queen's gloves. She wears them often. Inside, the sweat gathers, but the violet and clove distract. You dust the insides of her bodices with powdered sage and rose petals. She will wear these clothes for days, sometimes weeks, without change. When she removes them, the linen is stiff and yellowed, but no matter. The scent must outlast the smell. You are also responsible for the pomanders, little spheres of gilded metal, filled with waxes or resins infused with scent. One is hung at her waist, one is tucked inside her sleeve. Another may hang beside her bed. You refill them every other day, melting beeswax with storax, frankincense, and sandalwood, forming a ball that will slowly release its aroma. She lifts these pomanders to her nose often, especially in court, where the air is thick with perfume, sweat, and breath. There is danger in your work, not just from the lead dust that coats your fingers, not just from the mercury sometimes mixed in with rouge, but from the Queen's temper. If the scent is too strong, she flares. If it is too faint, she scoffs. Once, a fellow servant mistook bergamot oil for rose and applied it behind the Queen's ear. The citrus clashed with the musk. He was dismissed the same day. No trial, no explanation. On feast days, the scenting expands. You must perfume not just her body, but her chambers. Carpets are sprinkled with dried herbs and crushed bay leaves. Lavender water is poured into shallow bowls set beside windows. Sometimes, burning ambergris is placed beneath her throne, releasing its musky sweetness into the court air. And there is the matter of her wigs. The Queen owns dozens. Some are auburn, some chestnut, some laced with gold thread. Beneath them, her scalp suffers. It seeps. You must apply scented powders to the wig linings, rubbing in a mixture of starch and lavender to absorb the oils and mask the smell. When a wig is removed, you take it down to the still room and brush it with a boar bristle comb dipped in orange flower water. Then you lay it out in the sun, briefly, to dry. The next morning, it will smell faintly of citrus and starch, like cake left too long in a drawer. Sometimes, when the queen walks through the gallery, people say she smells like heaven. But you know better. She smells like orris root, old vinegar, and the constant tension of a woman holding court in a body that refuses to be tamed. At night, you rub your hands with a rough cloth. The perfume clings to your skin. You haven't washed either. There's no time. Tomorrow, she may want lily, or myrrh, or something new from Spain. You'll need to be ready. After all, you're not just serving the queen. You're covering her, layer by fragrant layer, masking the sovereign beneath a veil of violet, rose, civet, and musk. And in this court, it is the smell, not the sword, that keeps order. They say Her Majesty preferred her chambers warm, draftless, sealed, thick with tapestries and embroidered hangings. In winter, this was a blessing. In summer, it was a sentence. The sun rose early, and by mid-morning, the royal apartments were already blooming with a scent no perfume could conquer. You're a servant stationed just beyond the queen's privy chamber. The weight of your doublet clings to your skin with sweat, and the velvet curtain you just passed through has left a smear of dust and musk along your cheek. Welcome to summer in the court of Elizabeth. The windows, narrow and glazed, are rarely opened. A breeze might carry in the plague, or worse, gossip. Air is considered risky. Bad humors, they say, miasma. Sickness floats on the wind, so the chambers stay sealed. The stone walls do little to keep the heat out. Every heavy fabric, from the embroidered wall tapestries of unicorns and biblical scenes to the thick rush matting layered over the floorboards, soaks up warmth and releases it like a slow exhale of old breath. And everything breathes. The linens on Her Majesty's bed are changed less often than you'd hope. She sleeps beneath layers of heavy coverings, even in July. Her shift clings to her like another layer of skin. She powders herself with crushed pearls and white lead, a thick coat of it each morning. By noon, it mixes with sweat at the base of her neck. When you help lace her stomacher, you can smell the faint metallic tang beneath the rose oil. Perfume is a desperate defense. The queen favors sweet bags, sachets filled with dried lavender, rose petals, clove, and camphor, sewn into her sleeves, hidden in the folds of her petticoat, stuffed between embroidered cushions. You keep a bundle in your own pocket and press it to your face when no one's watching. But it doesn't last. Nothing does. The queen is constantly attended. Even in her most private moments, there are hands to dress her, wipe her brow, fan the air. You've seen girls faint during summer dressing, the heat, the closeness, the smell. Her wardrobe alone is its own trial. Gowns layered over kirtles over farthingales, ruffs stiff with starch scratch the neck, furs for ceremony, even in the hottest weeks. Once, a lady-in-waiting vomited behind the curtain mid-preparation and was quietly replaced before the queen noticed. The privy chamber is worse. The queen does not use chamber pots like a common woman. She has a close stool, a padded wooden seat with a bowl beneath. You are not the groom of the stool, thank God. But you do clean the surrounding space. And in summer, the odors of urine and waste do not dissipate. They grow, mixed with the smell of sweat, rotting rushes, candle wax, old wood, and spiced wine. It's like living inside the throat of a dying beast. Cleaning is perfunctory. There is no soap as you'd recognize it, just lye and ash and rosewater. Floors are scattered with new rushes only once every few weeks, and beneath the fresh layer, the old ones fester. Dead insects, food crumbs, bodily fluids. You've seen mold rise like smoke from beneath the queen's great chair when the floor was lifted. And yet everything must remain dignified. There is a routine, a rhythm. The queen rises and demands her scent box. It's passed to her on a pillow, a filigreed silver sphere filled with spices and balsam. She lifts it to her nose, inhales deeply, and you wonder if she smells what you do. You wonder if she knows. Then the rituals begin, the careful brushing of her hair, which is thinning now, the selection of her wig for the day, each one more elaborate than the last. They are lined with silk and waxed for shape. They trap heat like ovens. You watch as the queen's cheeks flush, but she never complains. You envy her restraint. Meals bring their own stench. In the summer, the meat spoils quickly. Cold food is a luxury, not a standard. You carry covered silver trays through the gallery, and by the time you reach the queen's chamber, the grease has soaked the linen and clotted in the air. Veal, eel pie, sugared fruits, all sweating and steaming in the heat. Her Majesty picks at the offerings and demands more hippocras to wash it down. You refill her cup with the spiced wine and feel sweat running down your back. The queen never bathes, not truly. A cloth soaked in vinegar and rosewater is wiped along her arms, her hands, her face. Her feet are sometimes washed in a shallow basin, but a full bath? She believes, like many physicians advise, that water opens the pores and invites sickness. She has bathed perhaps 3 or 4 times in her entire reign. So you keep the scents masked. Incense burned in small brass pots, pomanders hung from corners, cinnamon sticks crushed underfoot. You burn dried rosemary in a pan of coals and wave the smoke toward her gown. But the smells cling to everything, to the chairs, the bed, the drapes, to your own skin. At night, it worsens. The candles are many and thick, made from tallow. As they burn, they drip and pool and release a greasy musk. The air thickens until breathing feels like sipping from a stew. You are not permitted to cough. You must smile and curtsy and bow and attend. The queen sometimes walks the gallery at night, seeking cool air. You walk behind her with a fan of feathers. She does not speak. You listen to the soft shuffle of her slippers and the drip of sweat from your own brow. And when your shift is over, you stagger out of the palace into the humid dark, lungs starved for wind. You strip off your doublet behind the hedges and press your face to the earth. It smells of life, of dirt, of grass, of something not confined. And you weep, just a little, knowing you'll return tomorrow to the velvet prison of Her Majesty's summer, because no one refuses to serve the queen. But oh, in the heat of high summer, you almost wish you could. Then she opens her mouth slightly, not enough to speak, just enough to allow the silver-handled spoon to slip past her lips. The woman holding it keeps her hands steady, despite the queasy flutter in her stomach. As the queen swallows, she lets out a shallow sigh, and the breath that escapes is thick, sour, unmistakable. This is what it means to serve Queen Elizabeth I. Up close, every meal, every whispered conversation, every morning ritual begins with the reality of her breath. To understand this, you must first understand her teeth. They are not what her portraits suggest. Those paintings lie with every soft shadow and flawless cheek. In truth, by her later years, Elizabeth's teeth were blackened, some rotted down to the gum. She had suffered for decades from decay, likely due to her fondness for sugar, which had become increasingly fashionable among England's elite. Sugar was a luxury, but one the Queen enjoyed often, especially in candied violets, sweet preserved fruits, and elaborate confectionery. There were no toothbrushes, not as we know them. Instead, there were powders, crushed pumice stone, burnt salt, dried rosemary, and sometimes even ground brick or coral. These mixtures were rubbed onto teeth with a rag or a stick. Some attendants would prepare pastes for her, made from honey and vinegar, adding mint to cut the smell. It didn't work. The Queen hated dental pain. She feared tooth pulling, and with reason. The tools were crude, iron pincers that clamped and tore rather than pulled. An infected molar meant days, sometimes weeks of fever, headaches, and swelling. No surgeon dared draw her teeth unless commanded. The legend goes that when she finally had a rotten tooth removed, it was only after the Bishop of London agreed to have one pulled first in her presence to prove it could be endured. That tooth had been black for years. When Elizabeth awoke each morning, the first thing done was rinsing her mouth. A silver basin was brought with warm water infused with herbs, lavender, thyme, or sage. The rinsing was repeated twice, sometimes 3 times. She would swish, spit, swish again, and then wipe her lips with a handkerchief. Still, the smell lingered. To serve the Queen was to live in proximity to that breath, to carry on conversation, take dictation, and read poetry aloud while pretending not to flinch. The scent was described by one French ambassador as sharp and of decay, though his letter was carefully encoded to avoid offense. Her ladies-in-waiting, loyal or well-trained, said nothing at all. On feast days, the situation worsened. Sticky sweetmeats stuck between teeth, sometimes staying lodged there until the next rinse. Elizabeth had few teeth remaining in her final years, and those that remained were loose. She avoided hard foods and preferred stews, soft breads, and mashed vegetables. Still, decay cannot be softened. Occasionally, she would chew on fennel seeds or cloves. It helped a little. Clove oil was also applied directly to sore gums. The smell of it, spicy and bitter, became a kind of mask for the more acrid scent underneath. But cloves alone could not disguise infection. Some servants carried scented cloths tucked into sleeves, just to bring near their noses when required to stand close. Others burned rosemary or vinegar-dampened linen in small bowls in corners of her chamber. Not for her benefit, for theirs. The Queen never acknowledged this, but she noticed everything. She once dismissed a maid for wrinkling her brow when asked to adjust Elizabeth's pillow. The wrong expression at the wrong moment could cost your position. The Queen still smiled, though more cautiously than in youth. Her lips, once full, had thinned with age, and the gaps behind them were no longer easily concealed. She sometimes placed a small lace fan before her face when laughing, using it as a barrier between breath and guest. One particular ritual became nearly daily in her later years. A paste of honey, salt, and powdered sage was mixed fresh each morning and applied to her gums with a linen cloth. It stung. Her attendants said she winced each time, but she insisted it made her feel cleaner, more presentable. There was dignity in the effort, if not in the result. Then there were the toothaches. On bad days, she would become quiet, withdrawn. Her surgeons would be summoned not to act, but to confirm. They would press lightly against her jaw, nod solemnly, and prescribe warm wine and herbs. No help at all. She drank wine more than water, partly because of tooth pain and partly because she distrusted water. The wine, of course, did her no favors. It left behind residue, deepened the stains. As years passed, the queen grew more private, fewer meetings, shorter audiences. But still, there were councils to attend, suitors to dismiss, and foreign dignitaries to charm. When she leaned forward to whisper, or to speak softly, those close enough to hear had to endure the scent of long decay, masked with mint, cloves, and the fading trace of rose water. In 1602, the year before her death, she fell into weeks of silence. Her teeth, those that remained, had turned gray. Her breath was so poor that her personal physician recorded a note in Latin that the rot begins in the mouth. He meant no insult, only an observation. She had not smiled in days. And yet, every morning the ritual continued. Rinse, swish, spit, dab the corners of the mouth, apply the sage paste, then a drop of clove oil on the tongue, a fan in one hand, a mirror in the other. The attendants stood by, respectful, silent, pretending they didn't notice. And when the queen spoke, when she recited lines from Virgil or issued a command with that sharp, clear voice, the servants leaned in, endured the scent, and obeyed. Because that was what it meant to serve Her Majesty. To smile when she smiled, even if your eyes watered. To stand still, even when the air turned foul. To pretend, with unwavering loyalty, that nothing at all was wrong. Not with her teeth, not with her breath, not with the woman who ruled a nation and carried decay behind painted lips. You arrive at the sprawling palace, the heart of England's power, stepping through heavy doors that lead into a world shimmering with velvet and gold. But beneath the gilded surface lies a secret none speak of openly. Here, in the lavish chambers of Queen Elizabeth I, a hidden enemy waits. Not an assassin, not a traitor, but something far smaller and far more relentless. Fleas and lice. These tiny tormentors make no distinction between noble and servant. They are the unseen royalty of the Tudor court, ruling with maddening bites and unbearable itch. Your first task is to prepare the queen's elaborate wardrobe for the day. As you lift the heavy gowns, richly embroidered with pearls and gold thread, you feel the prickling sensation on your skin before you see anything. A quick brush of your sleeve reveals tiny black specks darting away, fleas fleeing the disturbance. The queen's sumptuous dresses are perfect havens for these pests. Layers of fabric, heavy padding, and the warmth of a human body create a perfect breeding ground. No matter how fine the material, it can't keep out the relentless bite. You move to assist with her hair. The towering, rigid coiffures, stiff with layers of powder and starch, are no refuge either. As you gently lift a curl, a cluster of lice scurries for safety. The queen herself is not immune. Though her courtiers speak in whispers of her poise and radiance, behind the scenes, Elizabeth suffers the same agony from these parasites. The constant itching, the irritation beneath her elegant composure, is a burden shared by all who dwell at court. Serving the queen means enduring this daily torment. You scratch discreetly behind your ear, but it's useless. The fleas jump, the lice crawl, and the itch gnaws relentlessly. The court physician offers remedies, concoctions of vinegar, herbs, and sometimes even mercury, but none provide lasting relief. Sometimes, the treatments do more harm than good, leaving skin raw and inflamed, a perfect invitation for infection. Even the queen's bed, swathed in rich fabrics and stuffed mattresses, is a battlefield. As you prepare the chamber for the night, you check the linens, but the pests have already made their home. They lurk in the seams, nestle in folds, and await the warm skin of their next victim. It's impossible to keep the bed completely free from them, no matter how often the bedding is changed. At court, the problem of lice and fleas extends beyond personal discomfort. The pests carry disease, and though the true causes of illness remain a mystery to Tudor science, outbreaks of fevers and plagues weave through the population like an invisible shadow. Serving the queen means risking not only torment, but sickness. You've heard rumors of courtiers falling ill, their skin blistered with lice-borne infections, their bodies weakened by fever. And the queen herself is no stranger to bouts of illness, her courtiers whisper, though the truth is carefully veiled. The constant scratching is a distraction during royal audiences and banquets. You notice how even the queen's usually composed demeanor falters at times. A slight flick of her hand to brush away an itch, a subtle grimace when a particularly bold flea bites. The courtiers are no better. Their ostentatious clothing and wigs are veritable insect hotels, making each gathering a silent war against invisible foes. Your own uniform, though simple compared to the queen's attire, is not spared. The coarse fabrics, often worn for days between washes due to limited laundry facilities, attract pests like magnets. You catch yourself scratching your neck and waist, worried that the queen's attendants or guards might notice. In a court where appearances mean everything, visible discomfort or nervous twitching could ruin your standing, or even cost you your position. The queen's hairdressers have their own nightly battle. Before the elaborate styling begins each morning, they scour her scalp, picking lice and nits with sharp pins. The queen allows it because the alternative, an itchy, infested head, would be intolerable. But even with constant attention, the pests are resilient, returning time and again. The fleas don't limit themselves to clothing and hair. They invade the very air you breathe, in the enclosed halls of the palace, thriving in the warmth and humidity, created by hundreds of bodies crowded into the ornate rooms. You feel them jump onto your ankles as you stand through long ceremonies, their bites leaving red welts that throb hours after. Some servants resort to extreme measures. You overhear talk of powdering, scattering fine dust made from crushed herbs or even sulfur over the floors, and beds to suffocate the pests. It's a hazardous practice, often causing coughing and sneezing. but the desperate seek relief by any means. Others use combs with razor-sharp teeth, raking through hair to catch the tiny enemies before they can multiply. Despite all efforts, the pests persist. Lice eggs cling stubbornly to hair strands, and fleas leap with a vengeance, immune to the crude treatments. The constant irritation erodes patience and focus. Mistakes happen, orders are missed, and tensions rise. You see how courtiers snap at each other, the strain of endless itch turning allies into enemies. You soon learn that being near the queen means accepting the pests as part of the daily reality. When she removes her gloves, you notice the redness on her fingers, tiny scratches from scratching. When she settles onto her throne, the soft cushions seem to come alive with the silent movement of fleas. By night, your own bed offers little respite. You find yourself shaking out your clothes, checking your body for bites, and turning restlessly as the itch drives you toward madness. Sleep is fitful, and you rise each morning dreading the inevitable cycle to begin again. Yet, despite the torment, the palace functions. The queen holds court, laws are decreed, and history is made, all under the tyranny of the tiniest invaders. Serving Queen Elizabeth I is not for the faint of heart or the weak of skin. The pests of the Tudor court ensure that only the strongest, most resilient servants survive even a single day. You stand quietly just behind the queen's chair, hands folded and breath steady, ready to assist, as always. But serving Queen Elizabeth I is no simple task, not when it comes to her morning ritual, the delicate, slow transformation of her famously pale face, layered in thick, ghostly white powder, and coated in creams made of substances you now know were more poison than beauty treatment. First, the white powder. It's called Venetian ceruse, a blend of finely ground white lead and vinegar. To your senses, it's a chalky dust that hangs heavy in the air as the queen's makeup artist prepares the mixture. The powder, pure and bright, promises flawless porcelain skin, a symbol of nobility and power. But beneath that bright mask lies a deadly secret. Lead is a slow killer, absorbed through the skin and inhaled as dust. It seeps into the bones and poisons the body over time. As the artist dips a soft brush into the powder and begins to dust the queen's cheeks, forehead, and chin, a faint cloud rises. You feel it settle in your throat and eyes, an irritant that lingers long after the room is empty. You're told to avoid breathing it too deeply, but there's no way around it. You are always nearby, holding mirrors, fetching water, steadying her head. The queen's skin, naturally smooth and fair, is almost obscured beneath the thick, cakey layer of white. To your eyes it looks unnatural, a mask of powder that shines under candlelight, but also cracks and flakes as the day wears on. It's said to represent purity and royal bloodline, a shield against the sun that might remind the world she was once a Tudor, born in scandal and danger. But you've seen the other side of this beauty regime. The queen's face beneath the powder is often raw, dry, and peeling, a fragile landscape of irritation. Her attendants whisper about the sores the makeup causes, the strange rashes that appear overnight. You wonder quietly whether the queen herself ever feels the slow burn of the lead beneath the surface, or if the allure of flawless skin blinds her to the damage. Next come the creams, thick, greasy concoctions meant to smooth the skin and hold the powder in place. They are made from ingredients you cannot fully name, oils mixed with chalk, ground pearls, and sometimes even mercury. Mercury is especially dreaded, a toxin that seeps through the skin and poisons nerves, causing tremors and madness. But the queen's beauty depends on it, and so the creams are applied daily with no thought for the toll on her body. You help apply the creams carefully, your fingers slick with the strange mixture. Your hands itch and tingle afterward, but you mustn't show discomfort. You know stories of attendants who fell ill, their health broken, after long days tending to the queen's face. Yet here you are, standing still as a statue, wiping away excess cream, brushing stray powder from her delicate jawline. The queen's lips, though often painted a rich red, are not spared the effects of toxic beauty either. The famous Elizabethan rouge is made from powdered cinnabar, mercury sulfide, ground into a bright pigment. It stains the lips vividly, but carries the same poisonous legacy as the creams. You notice the queen's slight pallor around the mouth sometimes, and hear rumors of servants who developed strange symptoms, weakness, headaches, strange twitches in their hands. You dare not breathe a word of it. Fear of displeasing the queen and the court's fierce discipline keeps such concerns locked tight in your chest. To serve Elizabeth, I is to accept the risks, no matter how grave. Worse still, the queen insists on maintaining this harsh regimen every day, even in the hottest summer months when sweat threatens to ruin the elaborate makeup. You watch as attendants fan her constantly, struggling to keep her powdered visage intact, while the weight of heat and humidity makes the toxins settle more deeply into skin and lungs. The process is slow and exacting. You are needed to hold the queen's hair back, steady her head, catch any flakes of powder that fall to the floor. Her patience wears thin at times, and your slightest mistake draws a sharp glance or cold silence. This beauty is her armor, her crown. You are only a shadow behind it. Throughout the day, you carry the scent of the powders and creams on your hands and clothes. A dull headache creeps behind your eyes by evening, and your throat feels raw from inhaling the dust. You take care to wash your face and hands as best you can, but running water is scarce and often cold. The queen's demands mean there is little time to rest. You hear stories from other attendants, some who worked for years close to the queen, only to be struck down by illness in their prime. Rumors whisper that the queen's toxic beauty regimen claimed more than just vanity. It was a slow poison, hidden behind powdered perfection. And yet, the queen's appearance remains an unyielding symbol of power and mystery. Her pale, flawless face captivates foreign ambassadors and subjects alike. The makeup is not merely cosmetic, it is a statement, a mask worn to conceal not only age and blemishes, but the vulnerabilities of a woman ruling a kingdom in turbulent times. You realize serving Elizabeth means sacrificing more than your time or comfort. It means exposing yourself daily to substances that will slowly erode your health. It means enduring the smells, the dust, the constant vigilance required to maintain this fragile beauty. You are a witness to a court where appearance is everything, but the cost is borne silently by those who stand closest. As the day ends and the queen retires, you carefully help remove the heavy layers of powder and cream. The queen's skin beneath is flushed and irritated, yet her smile is steady, her composure perfect. You dare not envy her beauty, knowing the invisible price it exacts. Tomorrow, you will return. You will stand again behind the chair, brush in hand, eyes watchful for every crack, every flake of powder. You will breathe the dust and feel the sting of toxic creams on your skin. Because to serve Elizabeth, I is to live with beauty and poison entwined, and you wouldn't last a day without it. You stand just a breath away from the Queen, the very air between you heavy with the scent of her presence. A complex, pungent mix of musk, rosewater, and something far less pleasant. Something that clings stubbornly beneath the layers of silk and velvet. This isn't just any woman you serve. It's Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen herself, who holds court and commands attention wherever she goes. And you? You are close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her skin, close enough to catch every whispered word and every subtle, unspoken command. Serving Elizabeth isn't a job for the faint-hearted or those who prize their personal space. You're thrust into a world where personal boundaries cease to exist, where your role is to anticipate her needs before she even breathes them aloud. Whether adjusting a sleeve, lifting a heavy train, or dabbing at the delicate pearl-white powder that masks her skin, your hands are constantly brushing against her, sometimes gently, sometimes awkwardly, reminding you just how intimate and invasive this service truly is. Picture the morning ritual. The Queen, wrapped in layers of silk, sits patiently as her ladies and gentlewomen prepare her for the day. You lean close, lifting strands of her famously fiery red hair, helping to weave her elaborate hairstyle into place. The curls are stiff with scented pomade, and beneath your fingers, the scalp is warm and slightly itchy from the powders and the wigs she favors. There is no time for hesitation. A single wrong move could disrupt hours of painstaking styling, and you'd be the one to bear the blame. Her breath, a faint but undeniable presence, mingles with yours. She speaks softly, issuing delicate instructions, and you nod, trying not to blush as you adjust the delicate lace collar that frames her pale neck. You catch the faintest whiff of a scent she favors, some blend of rose, ambergris, and something musky, a signature perfume designed to enchant and overwhelm. But beneath it all lies the unmistakable reality. After days without a proper bath, with sweat and oils trapped under layers of fabric, the Queen's skin carries the natural odors of human flesh. You know it's a fact of life in the Tudor court, but in this close proximity, it becomes impossible to ignore. Throughout the day, this intimate proximity doesn't relent. When Elizabeth moves through her chambers or the great hall, you shadow her footsteps, helping with her train, sometimes a yard or more of heavy, ornate fabric that drags behind her like a river of silk. It catches on furniture, and your hands must act quickly to free it, fingers brushing against the Queen's back or waist. You're so close you can hear the subtle rustling of her undergarments, the soft slap of leather shoes against the polished floor. It's not only the physical closeness that wears on you, but the unyielding expectation of readiness. Elizabeth's moods shift like the wind, and your proximity means you feel each subtle change acutely. A sharp glance or a slight stiffening of her posture sends a jolt through your nerves, knowing any misstep could lead to severe reprimand or public humiliation. She is famously exacting, and the slightest hesitation in your attentions is noted. Serving at such close quarters means you also witness the less glamorous details. When the Queen eats, you stand close, ready to assist, and you catch the faint sounds and smells of her meals. Rich, often heavy with spices and sweetness, but also the residue left on her breath, the small crumbs trapped in the folds of her collar. You are close enough to see when a cough or sneeze threatens her composure, to catch the moment her pale face flushes or tightens. At times, the Queen's own personal hygiene, or lack thereof, becomes painfully evident. Without regular bathing, Elizabeth relies heavily on perfumed powders and scented oils to mask natural odors. But when you are inches away, it is impossible to fully conceal the realities beneath the surface. You may feel the subtle stickiness of sweat along her skin, the slight dampness in the creases of her elbows or behind her knees, where fabric traps heat. It's a constant, unspoken challenge to maintain your composure, to not recoil or wrinkle your nose as you attend to her needs. And then there are the more private moments no servant could ever truly prepare for. Elizabeth was known to insist on certain rituals of closeness that today might seem extraordinary or intrusive. The Queen's personal chamber was a space where proximity was mandatory, not just to assist with dressing or grooming, but to offer constant vigilance. You might find yourself holding the chamber pot, attending to bodily needs, or helping the Queen in moments of vulnerability. The position of groom of the stool, one of the highest and most intimate offices, demanded complete trust and unflinching loyalty. The very act of serving the Queen's most private functions required a closeness that defied any notion of personal comfort. At court, you're not only close to the Queen's person, but also the constant parade of courtiers and officials eager to gain favor. The crowding and jostling in great halls mean you must always be on alert, shielding the Queen from too many hands, navigating the throng without disturbing her delicate composure. The heat of so many bodies pressed close adds another layer of discomfort to the role. Serving Elizabeth, I was not just about loyalty or duty. It was a daily endurance test against close quarters, overwhelming smells, and the emotional toll of existing under the scrutinizing gaze of a powerful monarch. You live with every stolen breath, every brush of silk, every whispered order, knowing that to falter is to invite ruin. In this role, the line between servant and confidant blurs. You know the Queen's secrets, her fears, her pains, all while standing mere inches from her, caught in the swirling mixture of power, perfume, sweat, and silk. It's a world where physical proximity demands emotional resilience, where every touch carries meaning, and every glance weighs heavy. By the end of the day, you are exhausted, not just from the demands of service, but from the closeness, the intensity of the presence you cannot escape. You retreat from the royal chambers, your senses still overwhelmed by the vivid reality of a life spent inches from Elizabeth Tudor, a life that few could endure for long. The moment you step into the grand halls of Whitehall or Richmond Palace, you feel the weight, not just of the heavy velvet curtains or the thick tapestries hanging like ancient ghosts, but the weight of expectation. The court of Queen Elizabeth I is no place for the faint-hearted. Here, your role isn't just to serve, it's to endure, to perform, to become invisible yet indispensable, often standing motionless for what feels like an eternity. Your day begins before the sun has even dared to lift over the London skyline. The courtiers, nobles, and servants shuffle through corridors, their faces set in carefully neutral expressions. The queen herself will make her grand entrance soon, her presence demanding silence, attention, and above all, absolute stillness. You are part of the royal household staff assigned to stand around her during her appearances, an unyielding, silent forest of attendants clad in the heaviest fabrics imaginable, from embroidered doublets to starched ruffs that choke your neck and trap your sweat. Your hands are folded tightly before you or clasped behind your back, and your eyes fixed respectfully on the floor or just ahead. Movement is a luxury forbidden. Every twitch, every sigh, every glance away risks offending Her Majesty's keen eyes. The first hour creeps by. Your legs begin to throb, muscles tightening painfully beneath layers of hose and breeches. The floor beneath your feet, once cool in the early morning, now radiates heat from the hundreds of candles burning in sconces along the walls. The air is thick, not just with the scent of beeswax, but the mingling odors of 100 bodies pressed into close quarters, mingled with the heavy perfumes that attempt and fail to mask centuries of grime and sweat. You breathe shallowly, each inhale drawing in the heavy musk of damp velvet and human toil. The queen's presence commands everything: your attention, your posture, your very breath. To flinch, to fidget, to blink too often would be to risk the silent reprimand that comes not from words, but from a raised brow or a fleeting look. Hours pass. Your back begins to arch in protest, and your knees threaten rebellion. You remind yourself why you are here. Prestige, the chance to serve the greatest monarch England has ever known, the possibility of a better life. But the physical toll is punishing. There is no chair, no respite. The courtiers around you are no better off. Their heavy gowns and thick cloaks press in on their lungs, and their powdered wigs make it feel as if the walls themselves are closing in. Outside, the sun climbs higher, beating down mercilessly on the palace windows, turning the stone chambers into greenhouses of discomfort. The heat traps you, a living statue, unable to stretch or shift, lest you invite the queen's displeasure. You swallow hard, feeling the dry scrape of your tongue against parched lips. No water is offered during these ceremonies. Hydration is a forbidden distraction. The attendants who can discreetly sip from small flasks do so with caution, lest they draw the queen's ire or the gossip of their peers. And then the queen moves. Elizabeth I is no mere woman. She is a force of nature, radiant in her golden ruff and shimmering gown embroidered with pearls that catch the flickering candlelight like stars trapped in fabric. Her steps are deliberate, measured, and as she passes, the entire room holds its collective breath. Your heart pounds in your chest, both from reverence and the physical strain. Your feet, aching and swollen, remain planted as if carved from stone. The urge to shift, to shake out the cramps, is unbearable. But you swallow it down. A cough bubbles up your throat, desperate for release. But you suppress it, your hand pressed lightly against your mouth. You cannot afford such a breach in decorum. Minutes stretch again into hours. The queen listens to supplicants and diplomats, bestows favors, and entertains with a smile that is both warm and impenetrable. Her every gesture is a test of your patience and loyalty. You catch yourself dreaming of freedom, of soft beds and fresh air. But the moment your gaze strays too far, or your thoughts wander too long, a subtle glance from a nearby courtier pulls you back like an invisible leash. Your shoes, tight and unforgiving, pinch your toes and leave blisters hidden beneath silken stockings. Every nerve in your body screams for relief, but there is none. To serve Elizabeth is to endure, to master the art of stillness in the face of unbearable discomfort. And then, the unexpected. A sudden draft blows through the chamber. The faintest chill cuts through the heat, making the sweat on your skin cool abruptly. The queen's jeweled gown rustles softly, and a small bead of sweat trickles down your temple, mingling with the grime and powder on your face. You glance down and realize, with a jolt of horror, that you've been standing in this exact position for nearly 5 hours. The reality crashes over you like a wave. Your body is not made for this. The court expects you to be a statue, a perfect image of obedience and discipline. But inside, you are fracturing. You shift your weight slightly, a forbidden motion, and catch the sharpest of looks from a nearby attendant. You freeze instantly, heart racing, knees threatening to buckle. The queen's presence feels like a living thing, watching, judging, always present. The ceremonies drag on well into the afternoon. You are allowed no breaks. The courtiers whisper to each other in hushed tones, exchanging gossip about alliances and plots. But you cannot even join in with whispered sighs of relief. Your lips must stay sealed, your expression unchanging. As the final act draws to a close, the queen turns to leave, her footsteps a signal of relief to everyone in the chamber. Yet the burden does not lift immediately. You must continue to stand as the room empties slowly, the echo of her departure lingering like a shadow. Only when the last noble has departed do you dare to collapse into a nearby chair, knees shaking, body trembling from the relentless strain. Your breaths come fast and shallow, the taste of dust and sweat thick in your mouth. You reach for the small, damp cloth you carry and press it against your neck, trying to cool the fever rising within. Your hands shake as you remove the heavy doublet and ruff, relief flooding through your muscles like a balm. Yet, even now, the discomfort lingers, the aches in your feet, the stiffness in your legs, the overwhelming fatigue in your mind. Serving Queen Elizabeth I is an unending test of endurance, discipline, and submission. It is not just the weight of her expectations that presses upon you, but the very physical toll of standing, always standing in chambers thick with heat, sense, and silent judgment. You wonder if you could last another day like this, standing motionless for hours, the skin beneath your garments prickling with sweat and fatigue, the relentless gaze of the queen burning into your soul. In Elizabeth's court, survival depends not only on loyalty and wit, but on an iron will capable of enduring discomfort beyond imagining. The endless ceremonies are a crucible, forging those few who can withstand the stifling heat, the aching limbs, and the ever-watchful eyes into the perfect servants for the Virgin Queen. Another thing you learn serving Queen Elizabeth I is that her mood is a tempest you can never predict, and there's no shelter from the storm. One moment, she might be regal and radiant, issuing orders with grace. The next, sharp as a dagger, her fury slicing through the air like winter's chill. You must walk on eggshells, knowing that a single misplaced word or faltering step could turn your day, or your fate, upside down. In the tight, fragrant corridors of Whitehall Palace, the air is heavy, not only with the scent of powdered wigs and rosewater, but with a constant tension. Servants are trained to read every subtle twitch of the queen's expression. The slightest furrow in her brow, the way her eyes narrow, or the sudden stiffening of her posture signals a shift from pleasure to displeasure. And displeasure from Elizabeth is not just a fleeting annoyance. It could mean public humiliation, removal from court favor, or worse. Her temper was legendary, and it ruled the court with an iron fist disguised beneath elegant silk and jewels. Elizabeth was no stranger to the exhausting games of power and dominance, and her servants bore the brunt of this volatile personality. Imagine standing in the queen's presence, carrying a tray of delicate cups filled with spiced wine. Your hands tremble slightly as you near her. She looks up, suddenly irritated. Perhaps the wine isn't the right temperature, or maybe the scent of the lavender oil you used lingers too strong. Her lips press tightly. "Do you intend to drown me in your perfumes?" she snaps. Your heart races. Your throat tightens, but you must stay composed. Calm is your only shield. The slightest flicker of fear or anger in your own face would only feed the fire. Servants learned the art of the neutral mask, neither too eager to please nor too obvious in their anxiety. When Elizabeth's voice rose, cutting through the hushed court like a sword, you responded with measured words, careful not to stumble, careful not to provoke. One of her most feared ways of expressing displeasure was to summon a servant before the entire court and chastise them publicly. A simple mistake, mixing the wrong fabrics for a gown, delivering a message too late, or forgetting a trivial protocol, could earn you a rebuke that would echo through the marble halls for days. Servants whispered that the queen's tongue was sharper than any dagger, and the sting of her words lingered longer than the pain of a physical blow. Elizabeth's moods weren't just random. They were a calculated display of power. The queen knew that her temper kept everyone on edge, ensuring obedience and attentiveness. This constant pressure turned her court into a battlefield of nerves, where every smile was weighed, every glance measured. Servants became experts in anticipating her next move, trying to read her changing emotions like cryptic riddles. But sometimes, the queen's anger erupted unexpectedly. There are tales of Elizabeth flinging objects across rooms or dismissing trusted advisors with icy disdain. Servants bore witness to moments when the queen paced restlessly, muttering under her breath, a storm brewing behind those bright eyes. In these moments, no one dared approach her. Even the courtiers kept a careful distance. Yet servants had to remain nearby, ready to obey any sudden command or to bring water and cloths to soothe her flushed face. Handling Elizabeth's temper required more than just patience. It demanded resilience and emotional fortitude. Many servants arrived eager, but left broken, worn down by the relentless psychological pressure. Some fled the court entirely, choosing anonymity over the queen's unpredictable wrath. One of the most taxing challenges was her mood swings, a volatile pendulum swinging between warmth and wrath. She could be charming and generous one day, rewarding loyalty with gifts and favor, and the next, cold and unforgiving, punishing minor slights with disproportionate severity. Servants learned quickly that yesterday's praise was no guarantee of tomorrow's kindness. This emotional unpredictability meant that no amount of preparation could fully protect you. You might prepare a perfect chamber for her rest, only to be accused of neglecting some unseen detail. Or you might manage to please her with a clever turn of phrase, only for her to sulk silently afterward, her displeasure hidden beneath a thin veneer of politeness. There was also the challenge of interpreting her silence. Sometimes Elizabeth would fall into a brooding quiet, her face unreadable. Servants described these moments as the most dangerous, for silence could precede a sudden outburst or a cold withdrawal of favor. You learned to tread lightly, speaking only when spoken to, watching for any hint of mood change. The Queen's temper wasn't limited to her servants. It was a tool she wielded against nobles and diplomats as well. But while courtiers could sometimes deflect her anger with flattery or political maneuvering, servants had nowhere to hide. They were the first to face her wrath and the last to be forgiven. Imagine the mental toll of living in this constant state of alertness, a world where your survival depended on emotional vigilance as much as on physical skill. You were expected to anticipate needs, respond instantly, and absorb the Queen's unpredictable moods without complaint. And yet, despite the challenges, many servants found themselves strangely loyal to Elizabeth. Her fierce intelligence and magnetic personality captivated those around her. Serving her was a test of endurance and wit, and those who survived felt a grim pride. But the cost was high. A day spent in Elizabeth's presence was a day lived on the edge of a knife. You slip quietly through the dim corridors of Whitehall Palace, the faint glow of flickering candles casting restless shadows on the tapestries. The air is heavy, thick with the mingled scents of lavender sachets, burning tallow, and the faint, stubborn musk of a queen who rarely bathed. Your task is clear: to prepare the royal bedchamber for Queen Elizabeth I's sleep. But in truth, serving the Queen at night means bracing yourself for a ritual that will stretch your patience and test your nerves. First, you begin with the chamber itself. The great oak four-poster, draped with heavy velvet curtains embroidered with golden fleur-de-lis, looms before you like a throne. But this is no simple bed. It's a fortress against the chill and the restlessness of a monarch who will not sleep lightly. You pull back the curtains carefully, revealing layers of mattresses stuffed with feathers and wool, stacked high enough to keep the Queen elevated above the cold stone floor. Every blanket and sheet must be freshly aired and brushed, the linens smoothed without a wrinkle, for Elizabeth notices the smallest imperfection. Then come the preparations that border on obsession. The Queen's chambers must be utterly free of drafts, yet not stifling. You arrange braziers filled with burning coals to warm the room, careful not to fill it with smoke. Flickering candles must be placed strategically, not so many as to overwhelm with heat or scent, but enough to give just the right amount of light for Elizabeth's nightly reading. You know well the dangers. Too many candles, and the smoke will choke the room. Too few, and the Queen's mood sours. Balancing this is a nightly test. But even after the room is ready, your work is far from done. You must assist the Queen as she prepares for bed, which is less a matter of removing clothing and more an elaborate ceremony. Elizabeth's garments are heavy, layers of silk, velvet, and brocade, adorned with pearls and jewels that clink softly as she moves. You help ease these away one by one, careful not to disturb her royal composure. The Queen does not simply slip into night clothes. She dons a silk nightgown, intricately embroidered, a garment as fit for royalty in sleep as in court. Yet Elizabeth's rest is often elusive. Her nights are punctuated by long periods of wakefulness, and her attendants are expected to be alert and ready. When she rises from bed, you must follow silently, bearing her nightcap, slippers, and a warm robe. There are nights when she insists on walking the chamber, pondering matters of state, or reading by candlelight until the small hours. You stand close, ever watchful for signs of fatigue or distress, ready to provide a comforting hand or a silencing gesture to keep the chamber hushed. One of the strangest aspects of serving the Queen at night is dealing with her peculiar relationship to cleanliness. Bathing was a rarity for Elizabeth, partly because of the era's beliefs about water and health, partly due to her own aversion. You sometimes catch the faint scent of musk and lavender oil, used to mask the odors that naturally gather when bathing is so infrequent. It's a delicate balance to maintain. Too much perfume, and it becomes overpowering. Too little, and the natural odors of sweat and wear become apparent. As an attendant, you are expected to master this balance, ready with scented gloves or pomanders to discreetly refresh the air. Noise is another constant concern. The Queen's sleep is light, so the slightest creak of a floorboard, the shuffle of a foot, even the softest cough can rouse her from rest. You learn to move like a shadow, silent and invisible. There is a tension in the air, a constant alertness, for if Elizabeth stirs in frustration, it can turn into a night of complaints and unrest. Your heart pounds quietly, every breath held until you are sure she is settled again. Then there are the cold nights when Elizabeth insists on opening the chamber windows slightly to let in fresh air, despite the chill. You cover her shoulders with a heavy cloak and place a footstool near the bed so she can stretch her legs. The cold air cuts sharply into the warm, perfumed atmosphere, and you shiver along with her. You wait patiently as she stares out into the dark gardens beyond the palace, lost in thought, or perhaps battling the insomnia that plagued her. Sleep itself is not a guarantee for the Queen, and neither is privacy. Courtiers and attendants sometimes crowd the corridors outside her chambers, whispering rumors or awaiting favors. You, however, remain within the intimate space of the bedchamber, the only one permitted so close at night. Your role is both honor and burden, for you witness Elizabeth in moments of vulnerability rarely seen by the court. When she finally settles into rest, though it is often light and restless, you keep watch, ever vigilant, knowing that a night's sleep for Elizabeth is a fragile thing. Sometimes she wakes suddenly, startled by a nightmare or a thought that will not release her. You help calm her, speaking softly or offering a comforting presence. Other times, she demands a glass of wine or a light meal brought to her bedside, and you must arrange it without disturbing her too much. These interruptions break the rhythm of the night, but they are as much a part of serving the Queen as the grand ceremonies of the day. And when the first pale light of dawn finally creeps through the windows, signaling the end of the long night, your work is only just beginning. Elizabeth will soon rise, surrounded by a new set of attendants, ready to begin the day as Queen. But you, the nighttime attendant, carry the memories of a vigil spent in near silence, a guardian of rest in a world where sleep is a luxury few could afford, and fewer still could endure. In serving Queen Elizabeth I during her nights, you come to understand that it is not just the demands of royalty that test a servant, but the Queen's very humanity, her fears, her restlessness, and her unwavering will. To last a day, much less a night, in her service requires more than skill. It requires patience, resilience, and an acceptance of the strange and difficult rhythms that defined her life after dark. You arrive at the royal court as a fresh-faced servant, bright-eyed and hopeful. Your first duty is to attend Queen Elizabeth I, the famously proud and resolute monarch of England. But as the years have worn on, you quickly discover serving Elizabeth is not for the faint-hearted, especially because of one harsh reality. Her hygiene, once meticulously maintained, has deteriorated with age, bringing with it a host of challenges and a distinct atmosphere you'll never forget. By the time Elizabeth is in her 60s, the radiant beauty of her youth has faded, and so too has her commitment to the cleanliness rituals she once followed religiously. In her younger days, her attendants spent hours preparing her, washing her delicate skin, powdering her hair white as winter snow, and adorning her with intricate gowns and perfumes that barely masked the underlying musk of the Elizabethan court. But aging had other plans. Now, her once prized daily baths have become fewer and far between. Bathing, already a rare luxury in 16th century England, becomes a near impossibility for the aging queen. The courtiers whisper about how the water must have seemed like a cold, unwelcome shock to her weary body. Instead, the queen relies on a quick rub-down with cloths dampened with scented waters, attempting to freshen herself in the simplest, least demanding way possible. But these brief cleanings cannot prevent the slow accumulation of sweat, oils, and the natural sense of a body aging in a humid palace environment. As a servant assigned to the Queen's personal chamber, you can't help but notice the subtle yet undeniable changes. The heavy smell clings persistently, a mixture of stale musk, faint perfume, and something more organic, decay, not yet fully recognized or understood in those times. The air feels thick, almost palpable, around her. The dampness of her skin after hours of close proximity sticks to your own clothing. You learn quickly that this is part of the job. Enduring the olfactory realities of a monarch who no longer, or perhaps never fully did, bathe regularly. Her clothing, once starched and freshly laundered, now carries signs of wear and faint odors that even the most potent of perfumes can't fully disguise. The layers of fabric trap the scents close to her skin, turning her sumptuous gowns into a fragrant prison. Servants assigned to manage her wardrobe must work tirelessly, not only repairing delicate lace and embroidery, but also trying to refresh these garments without the luxury of modern detergents. Rinsing fabric in cold water and then sprinkling aromatic herbs was the best they could manage, but it was never enough. Her hair, once powdered white and perfectly styled, begins to reveal the effects of neglect. The elaborate wigs and pomaded locks that were once carefully maintained now become less frequent, replaced by simpler styles and less regular powdering. The scalp beneath, often hidden from view, is suspected by some attendants to harbor lice, a constant affliction in the crowded court. Attempts to comb and cleanse the queen's hair become a taxing chore, met with her increasing impatience and irritability. You overhear hushed conversations among older servants who remember when the queen was the epitome of regal grooming. They lament how her hands, once carefully manicured, show signs of age and neglect, roughened by time and lack of proper care. Fingernails, which should have been trimmed and polished, are sometimes long and grimy, a sign that the Queen's personal attention to hygiene has faded. The decline in Elizabeth's hygiene has visible consequences for her health. The Queen suffers from frequent bouts of coughing and chest pains, symptoms possibly related to chronic respiratory issues aggravated by the stagnant air and the presence of mold in the ancient stone palace walls. The dampness in her chambers, combined with poor personal cleanliness, creates an environment ripe for infection. Yet despite these signs, the Queen rarely permits physicians to interfere with her routines. She is fiercely independent and suspicious of medical treatments, especially those involving purging or bloodletting, which were common in the era, but often worsened patients' conditions. Her declining health also affects her mood and temperament. The once vibrant and sharp-witted Queen becomes prone to bouts of melancholy and irritability. Those who serve her must tread carefully. Any hint of criticism or suggestion of change is met with cold silence or sharp rebuke. The Queen's vanity and pride make her resistant to acknowledging her physical decline, and she guards her privacy jealously, hiding the less flattering signs of aging from public view. As a servant, you bear witness to the Queen's increasing reliance on scented handkerchiefs, pomanders, and bowls of rosewater placed strategically around her chambers to mask unpleasant odors. The sweet fragrance of orange blossoms, lavender, and musk tries vainly to conquer the underlying smell of neglect. But no amount of perfume can erase the physical reality of a body aging and its natural, undeniable sense. The court doctors, aware of her condition, suggest changes: more frequent bathing, improved ventilation, dietary adjustments. But their advice is politely dismissed. Elizabeth clings to the old ways, perhaps believing that the avoidance of water will keep her youthful or prevent illness. The prevailing medical theories of the time warned against bathing too often, associating water with vulnerability to disease. This fear, combined with her personal stubbornness, seals her fate. You also observe how this decline impacts the social atmosphere of the court. Courtiers and diplomats visiting the Queen must balance respect with discomfort. To approach Elizabeth is to confront the complex reality of royalty, power and grandeur intertwined with human frailty and the harsh limits of early modern hygiene. Some guests mask their reactions behind forced smiles, while others discreetly retreat from the Queen's presence sooner than etiquette demands. Her attendants develop unspoken strategies to manage the situation. Windows are opened when possible, scented gloves are worn, and servants discreetly avoid lingering too close when the Queen's breath carries the unmistakable tang of illness. These coping mechanisms become second nature to you and your fellow servants, a survival tactic in the challenging environment of the Tudor court. Despite the challenges, the Queen remains a formidable presence. Her intelligence, political savvy, and commanding personality continue to dominate the English court and the wider European stage. Yet, behind the scenes, the reality of aging and declining hygiene reveals a very human side of Elizabeth, one marked by physical discomfort, stubbornness, and the limits of 16th century medicine. In your daily duties, you come to understand that serving Queen Elizabeth I is not just about tending to her needs and maintaining appearances. It is about managing the often unseen consequences of age and neglect. Your role is to keep the Queen as comfortable as possible, to to mitigate the odors and discomforts, and to navigate the delicate balance between respect and survival in the royal household. In this way, the story of Elizabeth's aging and hygiene is a reminder that even the most powerful monarchs were subject to the same bodily realities as the servants who served them. It is a tale of endurance, adaptation, and the quiet struggles hidden behind the grandeur of a golden age. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great! We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.